Greetings adventurers, this is Lorne, your guild advisor, and we are back with my weekly series in which I explain what content the newest episode of DanMachi Season 4 has cut or altered from the original light novel source, as well as expand upon what has been presented in the anime. Before I start the breakdown for episode 2, I do want to mention a concern related to last week's video. In the video, I mentioned that the anime skipped the Denitus, a meeting between the gods, and I summarized what transpired in it. According to some leaks related to the Japanese TV episode listings, the 6th episode of the anime is titled as Denitus, so it is very likely the meeting which was previously skipped in the anime will be shown there. In hindsight, that might make that particular part of my video from last week a light spoiler, but I'm making these videos without the knowledge of what content may or may not be rearranged for the anime adaptation, so you'll have to forgive me if I can't see the future like Cassandra. From here on out, please make note that similar situations could happen during the remainder of the season. Episode 2 starts right where episode 1 leaves off, the party in amazement as they watch Bell obliterate a horde of hornets along with their nest using his Argonaut charged firebolt. There's still some monsters left over to defeat, and after the opening, we see the expedition party make camp. A few events are rearranged and combined here. Originally, Bell receives praise from Chikasa, Oka, Cassandra, and the rest of the party as they collect the drops from the monsters they just defeated. Instead, this scene is combined with the explanation of damaging the dungeon walls to prevent monsters from spawning in the surrounding area. This decision by the anime works rather well, as it allows Bell himself to explain his knowledge of the dungeon to the party through a conversation that flows naturally into the party's praise. The novel just has Bell narrate this information to the reader, but the anime method lets him appear very knowledgeable about the dungeon to the viewer, and showcases his growth as an adventurer. Bell's conversation with Haruhime regarding the Xenos originally took place during the trek in the dungeon, but I believe placing it when they are building camp also works well, as this is the type of conversation you want to have in a safer environment. Bell has fully embraced the role of a hypocrite. He understands that in his journey to reach the bottom of the dungeon, he'll end up taking the countless lives of monsters in order to find a way for humankind to coexist with the Xenos, who are also technically monsters themselves. Welf and Lily's discussion is done well, and it's nice to see their dynamic on screen together. They may bicker at times, but it's clear they get along well enough to support each other. Fun fact, the Green Lanterns you see in the camping scene are actually containers filled with the moss the party was tearing off the dungeon walls. This is done to dim the overall amount of light coming from their camp so less monsters are attracted. Lowering the brightness in the area also helps simulate nighttime, which helps keep your internal clocks in check. The banter between party members during dinner was lively and gave the group a great sense of camaraderie. The tiny headbutt that Daphne did with Cassandra was also a cute little addition the anime made. A small bit of the overall conversation was trimmed down, which mostly involved a more in-depth explanation of the lower levels of the dungeon. The novel explains that floor 24, the party's current floor, is the lowest floor of what is known as the middle levels. It's commonly considered that a level 2 status is the minimum requirement to go down that far. Haruhime and Lily are level 1, but they are in the role of supporters who are being protected by their party members. The lower levels start at floor 25, and the recommended standard for entry in their case is a level 3 status. Luckily, Aisha and Bell are both level 4, which helps offset the majority of their party being level 2. There's further discussion about the deeper levels of the dungeon, and that the guild actually restricts information about them. This is mainly due to the fact that the guild is afraid that the knowledge would discourage adventurers from trying to improve themselves to go deeper. There's even rumors that there are dragons that leap between floors in the deep levels. If you're familiar with Sword of Ritoria, Loki Familia might have some experience in that regard. The party gets into a sour mood after discussing the danger of the deeper levels, and Aisha gets Haruhime to pour out alcoholic drinks that the Amazon snuck into the backpacks. It's very likely that this scene was cut, partly due to the depiction of underage characters drinking. It's also not that important in the long run. The purpose of the scene was to show that the group is getting along, and I believe they accomplished that with their previous banter in the anime. In the light novel, Lily actually makes her way to Bell, who is on guard duty during the dinner, and offers him a second helping of food. She notices that Bell seems to be enjoying himself, as Bell expresses he's always wanted to camp out with everyone in the dungeon. It's like a scene from the heroic tales he enjoys reading so much. Upon hearing this, Lily realizes that even though Bell has become stronger, his core innocence still hasn't changed. Her worries about him becoming distant disappeared. The scene between Haruhime and Mikoto washing dishes is original, but the anime takes this opportunity to incorporate a scene I mentioned they cut from episode 1. Here you see that Bell tells Haruhime and Mikoto that he wants the familia to grow together via flashback. Last week, I mentioned that Bell says a similar line to the whole familia, as Haruhime and Mikoto were originally in the Hestia Familia meeting. I'm glad to see it wasn't completely forgotten. Mikoto also promises to protect Haruhime during the expedition, which is a nice touch because in the light novel the promise is referenced but not actually shown. After Well finishes performing maintenance on Hakugen, Bell asks about the properties of the Hestia knife, and Welf mentions that its mithril material can conduct magic. In the anime, you can see Bell ponder about this fact, but the novels also reveal that Bell has been experimenting with his various skills. He figures out that his Argonaut skill has a max charge of 4 minutes when previously it was 3 minutes at level 3. If he happens to lose concentration or get hit by an attack, he'll lose the charge and any mental and physical energy he used to maintain it. Welf's explanation on mithril ends up bringing a certain idea to Bell's mind. As I mentioned last week, it seems the anime is trying to bring more attention to Cassandra's premonitions, as her scene with Chigusa in the tent is anime original. It's also incredibly ironic given what happens to Chigusa later in the episode. The two of them get along rather well, partly due to the fact they are both in charge of healing for the party. When it comes to the scene between Aisha and Bell, originally Bell was already on guard duty, and Aisha actually sneaks out of bed to talk to him. Their overall conversation is largely the same, but in the novels Aisha does mention she plans to have Bell help Hermes' Familia in a future expedition in exchange for her help. Also, it's mentioned that an old name for the area in the dungeon starting from floor 25 is the New World. It has a nice adventurous ring to it. Aisha also teases Bell before heading back to bed, saying she'll lend him her body in the event that he can't cool down. This line fits Aisha's character, but I don't mind the omission as it's somewhat out of place during an expedition in the dungeon. The party makes their way to the big open area of floor 25, and they witness the majesty of the Great Falls. Originally, there are all sorts of flying monsters such as sirens and harpies hovering around the area while the group tries to keep a low profile in order to avoid confrontation, as it would be incredibly awkward for them to engage in battle as they had to traverse the narrow cliffside pathing of the floor. The anime has Bell show his knowledge about the water in the dungeon actually connecting to a lake outside Arario, and how monsters from ancient times made their way into the sea. This water route is explored a bit more in Sword Oratoria, the side series, specifically Volume 6 if you're interested. Lily makes mention of the Undyne cloth that the party is wearing, and that it helps protect them against aquatic monsters, but they also allow the wearer to move more freely in the water. Though, as Aisha states, staying in the water too long is pretty much a death sentence, so the Undyne equipment is not invincible. It's also mentioned in the novels that there is a special development ability that some adventurers have that allow them to fight on par with monsters underwater. Let's just say there's a certain pair of Amazons that may have it. A little side note, but I love how Daphne was given a line by the anime to mention how weird it is to see blue steel crabs walk straight. The novel makes note of this because actual normal crabs walk sideways, but no actual character delivers the information out loud. Regarding the undercoral, the context in which Welf has previously seen it is slightly different. In the novels, he mentions he recognizes the material from his past experience in Hephaestus' Familia, but in the anime he mentions he visited Hephaestus herself and saw it. It's possible that this line may allude to a future flashback where the anime will adapt scenes between Welf and Hephaestus that were previously skipped in the past seasons. That's just my conjecture though. Part of the reason why Mikoto was chosen to retrieve the undercoral was not only for her ninja-like agility, but also for her Yatano Black Crow skill. It allows her to instinctively detect enemies within a certain range as long as she's encountered them before. She's the perfect candidate to fetch the undercoral as she can avoid monsters that may be lurking underwater. The aqua serpent that appears is an exception, because it's the first time she's seen one. Fortunately, Mikoto is able to take advantage of the martial arts Take taught her, and quickly turns the tables on the ambush in a well-animated sequence. The scene with Aina originally involved her pink-haired co-worker Misha, who started to tease her because Aina was clearly overly worried about Belle. Aina commenting about Dormal and Lubis being involved in search parties is actually an anime addition, but it works really well as a transition into what happens next. Lubis appears in front of the party with his lower right arm missing, followed by the moss monster pursuing him. The mace in his left arm is what is called a nature weapon, a weapon formed naturally by the dungeon, this one being made of crystal. Also, the anime seems to have toned down the gore a bit, darkening the area of Lubis' missing arm as well as admitting that the moss monster was originally carrying Lubis' severed arm in its right hand. The animation for the fight between the moss monster and Belle is done incredibly well, and the sound design really sells the impact of the hits in the scene. Belle remarks that the monster is likely an enhanced species, due to its fighting prowess in being able to read Belle's attacks. A normal monster would not be able to predict the attacks of a level 4 adventurer. An enhanced species is somewhat akin to a rare spawn in an RPG, an abnormal monster that is usually stronger than the other ones in the surrounding area. What especially surprises Belle is that after it unleashes a barrage of seed-like missiles, the monster retreats. It is incredibly irregular behavior for a monster which is normally mindless to employ hit and run tactics. The episode ends with ivy growing from the spot where Chigusa is hit, as well as the reveal that Lubis has the same ivy growth. Again, it's an anime addition for Cassandra to be confirming her premonitions here, but it's supposed to reinforce to the viewer that Cassandra's warnings are no joke. Overall, episode 2 was adapted rather well, incorporating a lot of world building into dialogue between the characters. In my opinion, most of the cuts made in the episode did not take anything away from what was in the novels. I truly think it's a good sign for what's coming in the future. In terms of danmemo, the mobile game, the side story for this week involves Aina asking Belle out to dinner right before the expedition. This is actually original content not from the novels. You can either watch the side story in-game or through the link in the video description. For those of you interested in my general impressions about the first 2 episodes as well as the OP and ED for the show, I will be uploading a video about my thoughts on the anime so far in the coming days. And that wraps up this week's video. I will see you all for episode 3 next week. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more DanMachi content and follow me on my socials. This is Lorne, your guild advisor, signing out.